This video will review the work that we did in class on April the 4th about building data tables. First, we're asked to calculate the net present value and rate of return of a project. This is straight off the exam. Then we're asked to create an Excel data table to show sensitivity of those outputs to one of the inputs, which is purchase price. So we want to show purchase prices of $6,000, $7,000, and so on. I always like to color the inputs blue so I know that they are inputs for a data table. It doesn't have any effect on the calculation, it just helps me remember. And then the first output we're looking for is NPV. We have to tell the data table where to look for NPV, so we'll point it to the NPV cell. I always like to color that one yellow. And then to make the data table, we'll highlight only the colored cells. Highlight just enough cells to get all the colored cells and no more. Then go to Data, What If Analysis, Data Table. And since our numbers that we want to put in the input cell are in a column, we're going to come down here and choose Column Input Cell and tell it which cell to input those numbers into. And then we'll say OK. And to format the table, I think it might be a good idea to come down here and just copy this format using the Format Painter and make it look just like it did down here. Now what Excel did when we created that data table is one at a time it took each of these cells. For example, it plugged in $6,000, looked at the result, and put that result in our table. I'm going to paste it up there as a value. Then it looked at the next input, $7,000, copied that result, and put it in the table. $8,000, and so on. So for each one of our input cells, Excel plugged it into B12 and then took the answer out of B25 and placed it in the table for us, just like I just did by hand. It's a whole lot easier with the data table. Let's reset this to where it was at $8,000 and go ahead and add IRR to our data table. So we can continue to add as many outputs as we like out here to the right in a one-dimensional data table. We'll color it yellow and point it to the output that we're interested in. And then to redo the table, we simply highlight again just enough to get all the colored cells and no more. Go to Data, What If, Data Table. And since our inputs are in a column, we'll choose Column Input Cell and tell it where to put those inputs. I'm going to copy the format again, paste it on the IRR. Now let's go to Part C, create a data table to show the sensitive NPV and IRR to discount rates, 8, 10, and 12. So we'll do the same thing. We'll type our label, discount rate, and we want to see that for 8%, 10%, and 12%. We want to see net present value and IRR. So we will tell the data table to look for the net present value in B25 and to look for the IRR in B26. Color those outputs yellow, color the inputs blue, and now we're ready to make a data table. To do so, we again select all the colored cells, but only enough to get all the colored cells. And then go to Data, What If Analysis, Data Table. And since our inputs are in a column, we will use Column Input Cell and tell it where to put the 8% and the 10% and the 12% as it goes through that table. And again, I'm going to grab the formats from our output cell and our other output cell. Notice that the IRR does not change when we change the discount rate, and that's good because IRR is not a function of the discount rate. It doesn't even look at that cell. Let's move on to two-dimensional data tables. These were one-dimensional in that they had a column. Two-dimensional has a column and a row across the top. So in part D, we're asked to create a table or tables, that's a hint, to show sensitivity of NPV and IRR to the purchase price and discount rates above. So we can copy this. We can copy this and do Alt Edit Special Paste Transpose, or we could have just typed those in. But now where do we put the yellow cell? The only room we have to put the yellow cell in a two-dimensional table is right up here in the corner, which means we can have to choose NPV or IRR for this table. I'm going to choose NPV. Going to point it at the NPV output, and then I'm going to color that cell yellow. This time, when we highlight the colored cells, and only enough to get the colored cells, and we say data, what if, data table, it asks for row and column input cell. This time we have a row, we still have our column input cell, and we want those numbers to go into B12. But this time we also have a row of inputs, and we want inputs from that row to go into B11. When we say OK, it fills everything in as we had desired. Since this is NPV, I'm going to copy the format from that NPV cell using the format painter and paste it in there. I'm also going to do an Alt-Hoi to get those columns wide enough. Now remember, D asked us for NPV and IRR. We were only able to do one with this table. So let's repeat the process for IRR. And I believe that was a typo. They should say IRR right there. So we can copy these cells. Oops, one down. We could actually copy the entire table, but I think it's easier to do it one step at a time. Now to look for IRR, we want the output to look over here at B26. I'll color that yellow, and then to create the data table, we'll highlight all the colored cells and only enough to get the colored cells. Data, what if analysis, data table. Our column input cell goes into the purchase price, and our row inputs go into the cell that is the discount rate. And we say OK. We get those answers. We can copy the format and paste it into the data table as well. And that's how we do one-dimensional and two-dimensional data tables. Let me just add a couple of comments about data tables. First, let me widen that column with an Alt-Hoi. First, I think it's very important when you have the base inputs, let's say the 8,000 and the 10% in the model, and you know what the base outputs are. It's extremely important to come over here and make sure that those numbers show up in your data table where they should. So when we have the 8,000, we should get these two outputs, and sure enough we do. When we have the 8,000 and the 10%, we should get this output, and in fact we do. When we have the 10% alone, we should get these two outputs, and in fact we do. And when we have the 8,000 and the 10% for the IRR, we should get that output. Now when I demonstrated what Excel was doing behind the scenes, I told you it was that we could paste in values and get the same answers the data table gets. The data table, though, actually uses an array formula called table. You can't actually type that formula in, but that's what Excel is doing. And it's helpful because it keeps these numbers live. For example, if we change the annual net profit from 2000 to 1500, it would change all of the values in our tables. Widen those a little bit. It would change all the values in our tables. So these numbers are still live and looking at what's happening in your model. So it's important to remember that. It's also very helpful to know that.